Good evening and welcome. I'm Neil Gordon, CEO of the Discovery Museums, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the third event of the 2022 Discovery Museum Speaker Series. Tonight's event is Helping Children Understand Climate Change and How to Make a Difference. This is the 10th anniversary year of the series, and I'm very much looking forward to tonight's conversation as part of that. So thank you for joining us. And a special big thank you and shout out to our great friends over at Barefoot Books who are partnering with us on tonight's event. So before we get started, I just have a bit of housekeeping. We'll be reserving some time at the end for question and answers. So you can submit your questions anytime during the talk using that Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and we'll address as many of those as we're able to. If you have any technical questions, you can use the chat button to reach the hosts. Tonight's presentation is being closed captioned, and you can turn that feature on and off, again, with the button at the bottom of your screen. And we'll be recording tonight's presentation, a link to which will be sent out to all registrants as soon as it's available. So before I introduce our presenters, I want to give a quick shout out to our sponsors and tell you a bit about the museum. So first, I want to thank the organizations whose sponsorship of this series has allowed us to present it free of charge now for its 10th year. Please allow me a couple of minutes to highlight a few of the sponsors and appreciation of their support. Our lead sponsor once again this year is the Foundation for Metro West, a community foundation that strengthens and improves the quality of life for residents in our Metro West communities. Since 1995, the foundation has been providing financial and educational resources to local nonprofits, sharing essential data about the region to inform our decision-making, and partnering with donors to increase the impact of their giving. Our partner sponsor, Enterprise Bank, is headquartered in Lowell, Massachusetts, with 26 branch locations throughout the Merrimack Valley and north central regions of Massachusetts, as well as in southern New Hampshire. They're a true community bank, leading with a deep sense of mission and purpose. Their success is consistently measured by the success of the individuals, businesses, and communities they enthusiastically serve. Another partner sponsor is Sutherland Realty Group of the Keller Williams Realty Boston Northwest. Patty Sutherland is an Acton native who has proven herself as a trusted resource and helpful partner in buying and selling a home or residential investment property. Patty is the daughter of local math and science teachers. She herself visited the Discovery Museum as a child, as a mother, and most recently as an aunt of elementary school-aged children. She's delighted to be a sponsor of the Discovery Museum Speaker Series and our programs. And lastly, NetScout. NetScout assures and protects the connected world. They make sure communication services and businesses can operate securely without interruption or slowdowns in performance, and take down cyber threats before they wreak havoc on global networks. NetScout's success is powered by their culture of innovation and an unwavering commitment to their employees, their customers, and their communities. We thank all of our generous sponsors for their support. And now, if I can, I'm going to share a bit about the Discovery Museum. The Discovery Museum has been serving the children and families of Massachusetts and beyond for 40 years. Our anniversary of which we are celebrating this year. We are proud of the speaker series, which are conversations on topics we know are important to kids and families in these complex and challenging times. We have two more events in this year's speaker series, including a presentation on understanding the role of technology in children's lives, and what's going to be a fun evening on the art of storytelling. Registration is now open on our website for both of these events. The museum's 40th anniversary is no small milestone. Just to put it in a little context, when we were founded in 1982, there were fewer than 100 children's museums in this country. Now there are over 400. Our work, however, was unique then, and it still is now. Like many children's museums, we bring experiential play-based learning to kids and families. But the Discovery Museum also adds an overlay of the scientific method to inspire discovery and foster kids' natural curiosity. And importantly, we're able to emphasize the outdoors and nature-based learning. We seek to provide an environment that is inspiring for kids and then work hard to make sure that it is available to every kid. We seek to be a model for parents and teachers and other folks in our industry. Building on our commitment to inspiring lifelong learners and encouraging children to appreciate nature, we've set some pretty ambitious yet achievable goals at reducing the museum's carbon footprint, resource consumption, and waste generation, all of which will be carried out transparently and publicly to model environmentally sustainable practices. One of the most visible initiatives, and you can see the picture of it here, of our sustainability plan is the installation of 326 kilowatt solar array canopy over top of our parking lot, making the Discovery Museum, as best we can tell, the first children's museum in the country to generate 100% of its electricity through on-site solar. As we celebrate 40 years, we prefer to look forward rather than back. What's next for the Discovery Museums? Well, simply, it's about getting kids prepared for the future. And that means a number of things like helping kids to be better equipped to embrace the diversity of humanity, helping kids to learn to use their voice, to stand up for themselves, stand up for truth and for science, and to stand up for each other. And lastly, helping kids be prepared to confront the biggest issue, perhaps the biggest issue of their future, climate sustainability, hence a little bit of tonight's talk. We do this all in age-appropriate ways that are good for kids and their families, and we hope to engage folks like yourselves in conversations on these important topics through this forum, our Discovery Museum Speaker Series. Okay, the commercial break is over. We're really pleased now and excited that Stacy Clark and Christy Mihaly are joining us tonight. Stacy Clark is the author of Planet Power, which is a children's book about the world of clean energy, which features lyrical verses and vibrant illustrations. Stacy herself is an environmental geologist, nature lover, educator, and climate journalist who enjoys distilling science into lively rhymes for young readers. Working between New York City and Dallas, Texas, she is inspired by the awesome potential of renewable energy to transform the way that countries around the world are powered. Stacy, nice to see you tonight.
Thank you so much.
Christie Valliere is the author of Water, a Deep Dive of Discovery, which shares with kids the magic and wonder of water and encourages them to become water stewards. Christy has written more than 25 children's books, mostly nonfiction. She has degrees in policy studies, environmental studies, and law from Dartmouth College and the University of California, Berkeley. She lives with her family in Vermont, where she is tonight, and where she enjoys the inspiration of the changing seasons and the endless varieties of New England precipitation. Christy, we don't actually believe that, but it's welcome here anyway.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, the endless variety of precipitation. That's for those folks out there who are not from New England. They can think about what that one is all about. It's really great and exciting to have you both with us. You know, your books are incredible. Your careers are an inspiration to other folks. You know, we're going to have a conversation tonight and talk about your work and what you've been trying to achieve, and a little bit about where kids can have a difference in the environment, whether it's around climate change or about protecting our water resources. But if we could, and we'll sort of go back and forth and give you each a chance on these questions. Could you just tell me a little bit about your story, sort of what motivated you, and what you're enthusiastic about, and how does the book you've written recently fit in with that? And maybe Stacy, do you want to start?
Sure, be happy to. And thank you so much for having us both tonight. We're so excited. And thank you to Barefoot Books for publishing our books. We're so excited about that. My career as an environmental geologist probably started at a young age when I just fell in love with nature. And, the out of doors was my sanctuary. Biking and hiking and all of that as a young kid really set into stone a love for the planet and a love for nature. And I think that when I went to school and discovered environmental geology firsthand, I was absolutely convinced that that's what I wanted to do, because I knew that I could translate the skills of learning about rocks and systems in the atmosphere into a career that would actually allow me to make a difference, whether it was water quality sampling or soil sampling or cleaning up, remediating a site that had been impacted by an old industrial facility and thereby making the town wells nearby potable again where they hadn't been before. Those types of real world changes really appealed to me. And ultimately, that love of nature transitioned in about 2000 to a real obsession, maybe you could call it, with clean energy and understanding for the first time with the climate crisis looming that clean energy and converting to an all electric economy and really educating everybody about wind and solar and water power, that was really the next step for me. So as you can imagine, that was the motivation behind Planet Power, was to teach children about renewable energy.
Right. And Planet Power is your first book,
It's actually my second book. It's my second renewable energy book. When the Wind Blows was published in 2015.
Okay.
And it was inspired by the Cape Wind Project in Nantucket Sound. Where there were going to be 130 wind turbines powering Cape Cod and the islands. But sadly, that project, like so many other renewable energy projects over the last several decades, has not succeeded. But hopefully now, with so many people excited about renewable power and so many people accepting climate change as a real issue of their lifetime, we'll see more and more renewable energy projects around the country.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, and thanks for being with us, Christy. You've had an interesting career as well. So maybe you could tell us a little bit how you got excited about this kind of work and how this particular book fits in.
Sure. And like Stacy, I started out as a kid that loved to be outdoors and loved to camp and loved nature. And my first choice of career path was I wanted to be an environmental lawyer. And so I did that for 20 plus years in California. And so as I've been sharing my water book with students in schools, I've been back to when did I first start getting excited about water specifically? Well, in California, there's not enough water. And one of the projects that I worked on was a huge mediation that involved all the stakeholders, all the people that use the Sacramento River, because if you added up all the water rights, the paper rights that the people had to use the water of the Sacramento River, it added up to more than the water that flowed in the river. And there was none left, or there was left for fish and other important values. So we went through the whole thing, but what I tell the kids is, can you imagine that? Here we are in Vermont, we got lots of water. So and for this resource, and this resource is so limited. So I was interested in water as part of like being an environmental advocate. We moved to Vermont about 15 years ago, and I began to think about transitioning out of being a lawyer. A lot of being a lawyer is being centering conflict in your life and dealing with a lot of conflict. And I wanted to do something that felt more creatively positive or positively creative. And I'd been thinking about writing for kids for quite a while, and made that leap and started doing that. And I've ended up writing in two main areas. One is civics and social engagement and activism, and the other is environmental nature books, mostly nonfiction, as you mentioned. And so water sort of is kind of the culmination of both of those, because we not only in that book talk a lot about the wonderful natural world of water, but also specific actions that kids can take to make a difference when it comes to clean water and saving water and that sort of thing.
Yeah, we could probably talk for quite a bit about the intersection between the environmental issue of water and sort of the need for, the importance of civics and the political questions that, drive that, and both clean energy, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, there must be a lot of your thinking, but for both of you, about how do you discuss these issues in an age appropriate way for kids, when it's both about the facts, but it's also about the willingness and motivation of our society to make change. Do you this may be a farther down the tonight's discussion question, but since we started on it, let's talk about it a little bit. How do you sort of talk in your books about what do we have the sort of willingness as a society to protect our resources and all of that?
Right. And for kids, I mean, that's the question. That's what we're talking about tonight, is how do you talk with kids about this really difficult, challenging issue, right? Like the world's in big trouble. And what do we say to our kids about that? So both Stacy and I have talked about that quite a bit. So for me, one thing is tell them the truth. And if they ask questions, try and answer the questions. And if you don't know the answers, look for the answers together and figure out the answers. But in the books that we've written, which are for this age group of maybe 6 to 12 broadly, you want to make it hopeful. You want to, in my case, I'll just speak for me. I wanted to convey how awesome and wonderful the Earth's systems are, and the sense that, in fact, there are aspects of the Earth that can heal themselves if we would let them, and we can also help in that process. And then each time I acknowledged a problem with water in the book, I had a suggestion for what kids might want to do. If it's like saving water, here's some suggestions that you can do to use less water in your life if you're interested in doing that. Or, keeping our water clean. Here are some ways that you can avoid putting pollution into your local water, things like that. So both small but true, statements about problems and accessible actions that kids can immediately take, because kids they want to act.
Stacy, how do you think about those questions?
Oh, Christy always inspires me when I hear her talking. I would say that kids in general handle the truth a whole lot better than adults, and that it's actually really easy to talk to children about these big issues, because when you give them the truth, they're open-minded, they're eager to be part of the change and to fix it. They want the skills. They want to take action. It's an intrinsic part of being a child when you hear of an issue that needs a solution to want to help. So I actually find children to be the easiest audience out there. They're eager beavers. And the other part of my answer would simply be that the great news for me and Christy is that there are solutions out there, as Christy mentioned. And in the case of my book, Planet Power, it's so exciting to reveal 6 renewable technologies operating in 6 countries around the world, because these are real grid connected projects providing clean electrons to communities worldwide. So this isn't just, you know, an idea. This is actually happening, and children can tap into that and get excited about becoming a geothermal engineer in Kenya, perhaps one day, or, you know, traveling to South America to see how the waterfalls make clean electricity. And goodness, you know, here in the States, you've got tidal power, wind power, solar power. It's all around the world. And it's so exciting to think that the natural energy of our planet produces the electricity we need. In fact, you know, the scientists have told us that when you multiply it all out, we've got plenty of renewable energy if we just tap into it, connect it, and deliver it to all the people who need it. It's a very, very exciting equation. And I think kids love to know that there is a solution out there.
Yeah, so let's talk about that a little bit more, because I know that that's a topic that's on a lot of people's mind, is sort of that line between fear and reality, and being clear and honest about, if we do nothing, there are negative consequences, and yet saying, here are solutions if we're willing. It kind of changes the problem a little bit in the kid's mind, right? The problem is no longer that there isn't a solution. The problem is we aren't implementing the solution. And how do you talk about that?
Christy, you want to go first?
Well, thanks a lot, Stacy. And that is hard, because Stacy's right. Kids want to act. I mean, the hardest thing for kids is to look around and say, here's what we're supposed to be doing. Why are we not doing it? And then you're talking about politics. I mean, Stacy's totally right. We've got the technology, we need the will, the political will. So then we talk about politics, and we talk about civics, and we talk about how the government works, and how different world governments work, and how corporations work. We talk about how the will has to be there to make the changes, and that we're at the point where we better do it. Both of us have encouraged kids to write letters to their elected representatives. That is certainly a way to make it a little more concrete for a kid. And if you live in Vermont, you're going to get an answer from someone. I'm not sure that all kids have responsive get that kind of response, but many do, because actually it's very appealing and can be very powerful to receive a child that is sincere and informed and demanding some action.
Yeah.
That's an important point. I received a letter back from then Senator Ed. Oh my gosh, I just had a moment. Not Ed Koch, he was in New York. Who's the Ed? Anyway, back in the 70s, I got a letter back from a New York senator when I wrote in about the pollution of the oceans. And at the time there were water bodies and rivers catching on fire because of pollution.
Yes.
Certainly sparked quite an interest on my part. But to follow on to where Christy was headed, I would say take advantage of the fact that kids love social media. They love it, and that's where a lot of their attention goes. I would, if my child had an iPhone or an iPad, I would have them follow the Weather Channel, have them follow leading scientists. Bill Nye is a great example. A little bit older, people like Bill McKibben, who talks straight talk every day practically, writes 2 stories a week for either The Guardian or The New Yorker about literally what is happening physically to the planet and the different actions being taken around the world, often by young activists like Greta Thunberg from Sweden. And the power of those voices and the fact that so much momentum and drive can be built around making a change because of these, between the science on the Weather Channel and the straight talk from people like Bill Nye, the youth spirit of people like Greta Thunberg. These voices not only empower adults like myself and Christy and all of us, but kids too. And I think that engages them and lets them realize they can step into this conversation and they can make a difference in the world. And that's really exciting.
Yeah, this is a really fascinating conversation. And I'm interested whether you think kids are reading these books by themselves or whether they're reading them with their parents, and how that affects the way you write about the topics.
And who our audience was when we wrote the books, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, mine is definitely in that there would be adults involved in reading the book. I know my internet is unstable, so I apologize.
Yeah, Christy, maybe you can try killing the video and seeing if just the sound comes through for a while. There we
Okay,
go.
so
That's much better. Yeah.
Good. Technology, we love it. So I assumed that there would be some adult involved in the reading at some level, and the work of a book like this is inspiring conversations between the adult and the young person. So inspiring questions and back and forth, and oh, look at this, and maybe we could do this. And the water book has many suggested activities. Some of them are in the nature of experiments. Others are things you can do at home to use less water. And the idea is to get a conversation going.
Oh, we lost Christy a little bit there. Stacy, how about your book in terms of kids versus adults as the audience for the book?
Well, kids are always my #1 focus, but I can't deny the fact that when I write for kids, I know that they're reading with their companions, whether they be teachers or librarians or parents, or big brothers and sisters. And having been a teacher for so many years in the classroom, I know that kids take their information home and share it either on the playground or with their parents and caregivers, grandparents. So I know that the message of our books is being sort of distributed beyond just the age group we talked about. When a parent, I mean, I didn't know that much about renewable energy until I started researching it in 2000. You know, I went to school for the environmental geology. It's not really quite the same thing, but it morphed into that. And so as an adult, I learned a lot, but most people, it's understandable, unless you're really committed to knowing about this one topic, don't really know about electricity, how it's made, where it comes from, the different ways of making it, fossil fuel electricity production versus renewable, and how very different they are. And yet at the heart of it, they're still producing an electron that turns on the light and powers a blender. And it's the same thing. And how exciting to finally understand that you don't have to dig up the earth, you don't have to plunder it, you don't have to mine, you don't need to frack, you don't need to do all of these other things. You can actually build wind turbines, and you can set up wave buoys in Gibraltar and Israel and around the world, even in New Jersey. All of these different things combined can create the same amount of electrons that we need to power our world. And so I write the book for children, but I know that adults get excited by discovering these solutions in both of our books. And I think it's exciting to know that electricity is something that you can harness in many different ways. And once you do understand that, you can become very, very involved in hoping that your community and your schools and your, municipal buildings and your faith communities can tap into these renewable resources that are clean and sustainable, abundant, and can take us well into the future safely.
Yeah, but
And-
I love the fact that your book explains the technology so well. We're installing all these solar panels here at the museum. I may have to get you to explain that to me tonight before we go. How does that actually work? Christy, it's good to see you back there. A little flaky internet there for a second.
Yeah, sorry about that.
That's not.
But I heard everything that Stacy said, and I did want to add that what we try to do is give kids hope, right? And show them concrete examples of where people are doing the stuff that we need to do. So in the Acton area, parents can just show them the museum and say, look it, this is what we can do to change how our energy is produced and stop putting greenhouse gases into the air. So
It's
great.
spot on our thinking about that is, we want kids to see those solar panels and say, well, what's that all about? Why do they have those? Why are we doing that? It's crucial. Kids learn as much from the way we do things as they do from the things we try to teach them, right? And
Right.
so just seeing the example is crucial. Both of you have mentioned a little bit about the fact that your books are full of stories of real people, or set in a variety of settings and cultures. One of the things a lot of folks worry about are the fact that the disparity in environmental impact, negative environmental impact across the world and across cultures and across economic groups. And yet sometimes we tend to think about solutions in sort of, upper middle class terms. Did you purposely try to write books that would reach a variety of and a diverse set of children and families?
Yes, absolutely. And that in many ways. One way is Barefoot Books as a publishing company wants to create books that show the world's diversity. And so the plan for the water book, and Stacy, your book also was from the start to have a global perspective. And we have a map of the world, and we show where all these different things are going on, where we're discussing aspects of water around the world. And in addition, there were times when one thing we could have said was everybody should always drink water from the tap. Well, you can't say that because there's some people who still don't have safe tap water. And so things like that we have to be sensitive to, definitely. But I went beyond that, and there's a lovely young woman activist in Canada. Autumn Peltier is her name. She's with one of the First Nations peoples, and she is like world renowned and has spoken at the United Nations. And she got Justin Trudeau to promise to clean up the water on the native lands where there are still people who don't have clean water, tap water. And stories like that demonstrate to kids that there's people all around the world with all different relationships with water. When I go into the schools, I talk about the people around the world who don't have running water at all, and the girls especially who are tasked with walking miles, sometimes hours a day, to get their family's water in a jar and carry it back to their homes. We've actually had kids walking around in our schools with like a gallon of water on their shoulder to sort of get a sense of what that would be like and how precious water really is and how lucky we are to have water just pouring out of our taps.
I'm glad you brought that up, because it was one of the questions I was going to ask you is, so many kids are, in this country are living in environments where, the scarcity of clean water is not an issue. They don't even think about it, but you've illustrated some good ways to sort of bring home the fact that that's not the situation for many people, and worldwide, it's not like there's an abundance of water. There's an abundance of ocean water.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Stacy, you all of your energy sites were all in different parts of the world. What made you sort of want to tell stories about renewable power from a global perspective?
I think ultimately it's to show that it's happening everywhere, that it's possible everywhere, and to give children these examples that they can be part of this transformation anywhere that you live in the world. And different parts of the world have different resources, have different some are rural, some are urban, and yet all these different technologies you'll find no matter where you go. And as I said before, the great thing is when you network them all together and combine them, there's enough to power the world. But I think to your point specifically, I would just say that economic justice is such an important part of, I think, the underlying message of our books too, is that it's not just renewable energy for middle class neighborhoods. It's renewable energy for everyone around the world. It's the beauty of renewable energy is that in many cases it's distributed, and when you distribute energy around the world, whether it's in the US or it's in France or Africa, wherever you might be, you're providing a way for people to charge their phones, to pump their water on their farms, to grow crops, to operate a website that allows them to send their wares and their pottery and their baskets around the world and truly engage in the worldwide economy, and thereby change the quality of their life, send their kids to schools, hopefully have better health care. So really, clean energy, I've always thought, is really a true democratization of energy, because it's no longer just these centralized behemoth industrial complexes. You're talking about separate solar farms powering wells on farms. You've got wind power over here powering industry. You've got tidal power and wave power providing electrons to coastal communities and maybe remote island nations that for so long have had to rely on diesel fuel, which has been very, very harmful to their health and very expensive. So I guess I would just say that as so much a part of renewable energy and the discussion of water conservation and preservation is around changing the world in such a way that everybody can participate, everybody can benefit from a new world order, if you want to say it that way, where everything is sustainable, everything is reliable, everything is healthy. And I think that's a very hopeful message for kids and their reading companions.
That's great. This is fascinating to hear you both talk about this. I'll ask a few more questions about the details. Christy, you had a lot of first-person international stories in your book. How did you go about finding those books?
Oh, those stories. So I just want to thank Barefoot Books, the publisher, for that aspect of this book. It was really their connections, and like I'm just going to show you the spread from the book, all the world storytellers who contributed. Some of the stories that are in here are stories from their childhoods, or folk stories or traditional tales from the places where they grew up or where their families are from. And it just adds this whole other element to a kid's understanding of water. The notion was all these traditional mythical type tales give you a sense of how important water is to all the cultures all around the world. But I actually don't get credit for collecting those stories. The Barefoot Books editor, Emma Parkin, did that, and she did an amazing job. So it was part of the original vision of the book, and I really like the level, the dimension that it added to it.
Well, I think it's an important way of thinking about, all kids learn differently.
Mm-hmm.
And so how they access the points of your book could be very different for different kids. And folk tales and stories might be a point of access for some kids. Pictures and drawings and illustrations might be really critical, and both of your books are just completely engaging visually, and that goes without saying. And then some kids just want to access the science and the facts.
Right. All true.
But both of you have done a really wonderful job of making the information there in multiple different layers. I remember when reading Stacy's book, I went through all the rhymes and the verse parts of it, of the beginning of it, and thought, okay, this is pretty good for a younger kid. And then I got to the back of the book, and suddenly it's like a whole different level of information and in the back. Marie's bringing up a good example of, this is the back of the book. We don't have the front of the book though, I don't think, do we, Marie? But there we go. Tell us about that difference, Stacy. You've got the front of the book and the back of the book. Wind power addressed in different ways.
Yeah, so thank you for showing these pictures that were created by Annalisa Bigali, an Italian illustrator. Excuse me. Gosh, sorry about that.
She's calling you. Thank you for the.
Yeah.
Let me get back to you guys. You can't see me?
No, we can see you.
We can see you.
Oh, you can see me. Oh, great. Oh, great. Okay. The reason I write in rhyme and love to have that included, and I'm so glad I got to have both in this book, is because when I read to my son, Dylan, it was always the third story that I would choose that would be in rhyme, because it was a very soothing way to end the day. Both, you engage in a cozy conversation, but it also gets them to sort of relax and let go of the day and go to sleep. So I often read two sort of action books or adventure books, but then always one in rhyme. So they're very special to my heart. And I think every parent and an educator needs to have rhyming stories to appeal to children who maybe need to calm down at the end of the day. But it's also exciting to be able, whether you're an educator, a librarian, or a parent, or just a friend reading, to be able to then refer to the back of the book and answer many of the questions that might come up as kids point in the pictures to different components of the technology. How does that work? What's that? So I felt really, really lucky that this book is almost like two books in one, if you will. And I think it expands the age range from very young, you know, you can read a rhyming story to a 3 or 4-year-old, maybe even a 2-year-old, just the lilt and the rhythm helps a child relax, and then take it all the way to you know, early to late elementary and even early middle school for research projects, because often research projects on something like clean energy or water, you know, it's not necessarily you know, it's not a dissertation. And I think that our books provide much of the information that you need to be able to compose an essay or do a research report. And so they're sort of how-to guides in a way, as well as just engaging stories.
I really love the image of a kid falling asleep to a rhyme about a renewable energy source. And you think about sort of how we're going to instill a passion for these things in kids' heads. It's sort of, there you go. There's a big one. Have them be the thing they fall asleep to.
Exactly.
It's really thing. Do we have one of an image from Christie's book that we could share? And Christy, you could tell us a little bit about what you were trying to achieve here. And I think this is the popped open version of it.
Right. So the flap opens there. Yes. So this, we really wanted this book to be engaging and to have a lot of opportunities for opening flaps and looking under things. But in this book, each spread of the book, and it's a longish book for an illustrated book, but each spread of the book is a separate science topic about some aspect of water. We called this recycled water, but it's about the water cycle. And in each topic, I really wanted to find some interesting fact that would hook kids. And for the water cycle, it was that the water that's been going around and around the earth for billions of years is the same water that's been going around all that time. So the glass of water that you drink today may have molecules in it that the dinosaurs drank a few million years ago, and it's going to go around and around some more. And for a kid to think about that as a way of thinking about the water cycle, we thought would be kind of fun. And then, of course, trying to anticipate questions that a child might have when learning this stuff. It's like, ew, isn't that going to be dirty water? What's up with that, right? And so that gives me the opportunity to talk about how the natural processes of the earth, wetlands, and the importance of wetlands in filtering water and making it clean again, and the fact that it evaporates and comes back down. I mean, these are part of like what's so cool about how nature operates in a way that that is sustainable. So that's a little bit about the thinking. And of course, the illustrator, again, Mariona Cabasa. Mariona lives in Spain, and she did just stunning artwork for this book. It was really fun to work with her on this. And oh, yes, one of my favorite spreads in the whole book. And this is the final kind of poetic summary of you know, what I've been saying about water throughout this whole book. A drop of water that a dinosaur drank 66 million years ago, that flowed down the Nile in ancient Egypt, that helped put out a forest fire 20 years ago. You know, all this, it's like this water is a treasure. And Mariona's art just sort of makes it come alive in a really wonderful way. I'll also point out that in doing the art, Mariona, gave free rein to her imagination and design sensibility and did some, as I said, stunning artwork. But she also, we did a lot of back and forth to make sure that all of these species are accurately portrayed. So in fact, the black and white fish over on the left side there on page 56, I was just visiting a class of first graders and they wanted to know, what kind of fish is that? I actually had to go look it up so that I would have the answer to the first grader's question about what species was in the book. But yeah, it does bring it alive in as you said, some kids really respond so strongly to the visual presentation, and it's really wonderful to have that too.
That's terrific. I'm wondering, both of you have, experience teaching, have you thought about, or do you recommend any sort of hands-on at home activities that parents could do with their kids in conjunction with the books, or for teachers, any kind of activities? I mean, this is a trick question, maybe. This one we didn't rehearse this question.
Yeah,
so.
no, that's a good one. And Stacy is the actual teacher. I've just been going in with my book as sort of an imposter teacher, but the book, the water book, does have, every time you lift a flap, there's little experiments and things like that, which can be really fun. But my main answer to that question is go outside with your kids, go hiking, and we have one particular lift the flap that says, go to a puddle or a pond or whatever body of water is accessible to you and look at what's in it. Think about the importance of water for all these other living things. Maybe take a magnifying glass and see what you can see in there. Think of ways to get outside and really get that deeper appreciation for what's out there.
Right. Stacy, do you have any thoughts about activities?
Well, I love Christie's ideas so much, because being outside and being in nature is the true elixir for children, and it's what gets them so motivated, I think, as young adults and older adults to care about the planet. I might add that in relation to renewable energy, it might be fun to explore how your own home is powered, after you read the book, and discuss that. And depending on where you live in the country, you might be able to change your electricity provider. If you're not being powered by wind or solar, you might be able to change your electricity agreement. You might be able to meet with town officials at a meeting and discuss maybe building a solar farm. I believe Acton has a solar farm where the museum is located, and that provides clean electricity to power your municipal buildings and perhaps beyond that as well, I think. Different towns and cities have different commitments to building renewable power and relying on it. Some have goals of, 2030, 2040. Just diving in and beginning to ask questions, talking to your neighbors about where they get their power, talking to your school, talking to your faith community. Many faith communities have committed to buying renewable power. So, I think that's an exciting, fun thing to do. But of course, I'm the one who wrote a book about renewable power, so I would. Yeah.
I'm glad you both brought up the getting outside portion. We have a question from the audience about younger kids and younger kid books. Before kids are ready for your books, do you have suggestions for them about the sort of the preschool versions, or are you going to say don't read them, just get them outside?
No, books are great for any age, and there are wonderful books starting with board books about just, like what is a flower and, what is a plant, and, some from the very basic levels. There are more and more wonderful books out there. And I have a grandchild who is 1 year old, and there's a cloth book about the ocean, and you pull up the coral and there's a fish behind it, and there really are amazing and wonderful resources out there for kids book wise, and also like children's museums are another wonderful resource. But getting kids excited about all the cool stuff out there, I think, is what you're doing. And when they're really little, you're not worrying you don't want, it's not a thing where you are need to feel obligated to cram information into their heads. It's just sharing the wonderment of it all, I think, is your goal for the young kids.
Right. Stacy, do you have any other thoughts on that topic about younger kids?
Exactly. How great a garden smells, how beautiful a rain shower is, how lovely it is to feel the wind on your face, the sunshine coming down after, a snowstorm. I mean, articulating and sharing these very real experiences of being out of doors, I think, helps to build a vocabulary for nature and for the environment, helps to embed in one's mind and heart the value and certainly build memories around experiences outside, which definitely drive children at a young age into pursuing certain interests as they get older. So yeah, I agree with everything Christy said. It's experiencing it and sharing it with words, right? Yeah. And maybe sometimes just sharing it with holding a hand, but being there together outside, whether it's a starry night, whether it's a sunny morning, all of that matters. It all adds up. Each one of those moments is an important learning experience.
Okay. Both of you talked about exactly that topic as you were introducing yourselves. You both talked about how it was your early childhood experiences connected out in nature that you have the memories of that ultimately led you down the careers. And we talked a little bit about disparity issues earlier on when we talked about sort of more of the solutions and the impact, but you also have the sort of an access to nature disparity issue. And I know this is not either of your topics on your books, but I don't know whether you have any thoughts about are there ways to help connect kids who have less access to nature in maybe less, and it's particularly an urban design issue. And
it's a huge, yes. It's an equity issue. It's a social equity issue. It's an all kinds of issue. And yes, finding parks is one. I mean, obviously there's a safety element for some kids depending on their situation, but I mean, an involved adult can find a place to get a child outside. Gardening and city gardens, community gardens, rooftop gardens, window boxes. These are all possible ways to bring some nature to urban kiddos. You live in the city, Stacy. Tell us other ideas.
Well, here in New York, we're spoiled because we have Central Park, which is
right.
A place unique and wide and vast and wonderful. And you see families from every part of the city and often coming from outer state just to explore. It's rambling I can almost call them hills because they're these large, glacial rocks that create beautiful wandering lanes, walkways, and, even climbing experiences for kids. But, there are local YMCAs in many cities that have, kids clubs, and they do gardening and they walk outside and they, they go to the basketball court and, sometimes they go bicycling. So I think if you're committed, it is harder in an urban setting. There's no doubt about it. But if you're committed to it and you set aside a Saturday or a Sunday, a day off when you can be together, get on the train, get on the bus, maybe bike someplace and pack a picnic and a backpack and explore together. There are ways to do it, but sometimes it takes a little creativity.
That's for sure. That's good. So as we're getting near the end of our time here, I wonder whether your work on these books and your work talking to kids and to families about your books has left you hopeful or optimistic, or are you going to go crawl into a hole somewhere? I mean, how are you feeling based on the sort of your work and how it affects people? You can go first, Christy. You got it.
Yeah, I think that learning more about the science actually does give me new hope. I mentioned that I thought it was really interesting, learning more about some of the natural systems and the natural resilience of the earth. Obviously, we can't just sit around and wait for the earth to heal itself, but reading about the really cool stuff that people are doing to restore coral reefs, as an example, and how effective it can be if you can grow little baby corals off in the lab, and then you take them to the ocean and new coral. It's wonderful. It doesn't solve all the problems. It doesn't solve ocean acidification, but you're able to see there's possibilities there. And so I feel like the more we understand science and the more I learn about the technology and what scientists are working on, the more I feel that there is cause for hope. In addition to feeling like we're reaching a real critical mass in terms of people having the level of knowledge and concern and motivation to do what we have to do to slow down climate change. So hope.
Yeah.
I vote for hope.
You vote for hope, Stacy. How are you going to vote?
Yeah, I'd agree. I think my first point would be that it's always hopeful talking to kids, because they just, there are no barriers. There's no resistance. They're just open books. They're sponges. They typically appreciate the path of least resistance. And in the case of renewable energy, for example, the path of least resistance is renewables. Yeah, I think hope is the right word. And I think that if you look at the youth activists around the world, many of them very young, 12 and 13 years old, leading their middle schools in all types of different campaigns to raise awareness around the climate and water preservation and renewable energy and climate change and the consequences of what's happening, and then talking about change and engaging local politicians and representatives to become part of the solution is really exciting. Here in New York City, it was the constant and very polite often, but the very unrelenting conversations that youth activists had with their local representatives that helped to bring about a lot of important changes, including the divestment of New York City's pension fund from fossil fuels. So that's no small, that's not, that's a big deal. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's really important for adults to know that young people can use their voice in very impactful ways, and that they should never fear using their voice. And parents and educators need to embrace this idea and encourage and empower children to either write letters, to speak out, to get together with their friends, start a club, ask questions. And when you don't get the answer you want, keep asking questions until you're satisfied. And that's the way to build a real committed, thoughtful citizen. And we all need to be part of the effort to cultivate citizens and civic-minded young people who can, lead the cause that we all care so much about. The group of us here, and I know the people watching as well.
It's a great thing to think about, the fact that we're going to let the kids save us. Like that. Yeah, I think you might be right there. We had Varshini Prakash last year, who was one of the founders of the Sunrise Movement. Was one of our speakers last year, and Varshini grew up here in Acton.
Wow.
So apparently something that's going on here in this town is good for inspiration of younger generations.
Yeah.
And I like the notion too that parents shouldn't be afraid if their kids want to act and take action, but they should find ways to support that and nurture that. And it's part and parcel of not only environmental activism, but civics and democracy and period. Those things go hand in hand. So thanks for that. What are you both working on now?
Christy, you want to go?
I've done a few projects since the water book. I had a book about the Supreme Court come out, a picture book about the Supreme Court, which is another topic of current interest.
Yeah.
And I'm working on a book. I'm working on the very beginnings of a book that's not public yet, but it involves an insect. I'll tell you that.
Ooh.
We'll be looking forward to that. How about you, Stacy? What are you up to?
I'm working on a new type of renewable energy book. It's a rhyming story about the adventure and magic of bicycling for children.
Nice.
Bicycling through all kinds of different environments, and the thrill of it, and the fun of it, and the memory of it. And of course, cycling is a great way to get around without impacting the climate in any way negatively. So I'm excited.
Plus getting into nature.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That sounds like there are more great things that we'll be talking about maybe in a future one of these conversations. But I want to thank you both for taking the time to be with us tonight, but more importantly, thanking you for having an interest in these topics and writing such wonderful books about them and helping to inspire another generation of kids to get out there and fight for the environment. So thank you for being here, and thank you for your work. And with that, I don't think we have any other questions from the audience. So I think we'll say goodnight. For all the folks who are listening in, you will be getting a follow-up survey from us. We'll hope that you'll take the time to respond to that, and we'll also be mailing out any resources that Stacy and Christy have recommended. So with that, I will say good night and take care.
Thank you so much, Jill.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks very much.
Bye.